Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Destination Truth. Today I am walking through a vineyard in Northern California, and I've been thinking about this for some time, but thanks to some books I've read recently, I really feel the need to make a 6-part series that's about 10 minutes each for a total of about an hour that's going to inform you of some really important things as quickly as possible, so that you might better understand the world in which you live. And this first episode, this first segment, I think might be the most boring, but it's still extremely relevant because anyone that's young, anyone that's a millennial or younger, I need you to understand something about the world that you live in, which is you don't have to be poor. You don't have to accept the reality in which you live simply because it is the reality in which you live. In other words, yes, the world in which you live right now, if you live in the West, especially in the United States, the reality tells you this: you need a dual income to survive. So your girlfriend, your wife, or your husband has to work, and there's really no way around that anymore. And if you looked at the history of it, you'd know that that's a fact as of recently. That hasn't been a fact for very long. Back in the 90s, just like, less than 30 years ago, less than 30 years for sure, for anybody, a single income could support a household of up to like 5. And that was on average. We're talking about like the middle class. We're not talking about the upper middle class, not talking about the lower class necessarily, but the lower class, thanks to the welfare state, has been able to support way more than a 5 family income. Sorry guys, this is bugging me. I'm sorry I had this on automatic. Okay. But I'm in an interesting vineyard right now, and I apologize for the lighting, but it hasn't been forever that America's basically sucked to live in, okay? And the fact that people are so brainwashed in this country that they actually believe Donald Trump was some kind of an enemy of the people, that's just because they're brainwashed. They've been told what to believe, and they have to believe that because that's what the left tells them. The mainstream media is telling them what to think, and they of course believe they have the capacity for actual complex and critical theory and thought as to what they actually believe. But in reality, it doesn't take a lot for these people to believe what they're fed. For example, a statistic came out I think in 2017 that did prove that the average millennial will believe pretty much anything that they see on social media being posted. So in fact, they're making political decisions and making voting decisions based on what their friends post, or in reality repost on social media. So they haven't actually done any real research themselves. They basically will watch whatever's on the mainstream, and whatever their friends post is basically all they need to make a decision as to who they think the next president should be. Whoa, what the fuck? Sorry, I just came across this like man-made lake and it's creeped me out. Might as well keep going. Nonetheless, guys, millennials, what is going on? What is that? Turtle? There's something in this water for sure. Something is alive in there. Okay, moving on. So if you look back to, if you're my age, your parents, it didn't take a great job necessarily to support a family of 3, let alone a family of 5, and being able to afford buying a house, and a car, if you haven't already done it. By age 28, the average American man in the 1980s was able to support buying a house or a mortgage, as well as paying for a car or another car, their second car, and children. For the better part of America these days, that is in fact an impossibility. And it's going to continue getting worse and worse. And there was a science once upon a time called consumerism. A science, they called it. But it was the research of basically the buying power of the US dollar. And of course, the globalists needed to get rid of that so that people didn't realize how shitty things were getting for themselves. So that science isn't actually taught in universities anymore. In case you didn't know, one of the many, many things in this world which contribute to just how bad the education we get from public schooling is. It's like they're literally just getting rid of things. They're just like slowly push them out. Like that's a soft science. It's not important. No one needs to worry about that. So anyways, I guess they must have said, oh, we can lump that into economics. Anyways, no one's actually doing research on this kind of stuff anymore. So people don't really realize or pay attention to the fact that the power of the US dollar, the purchasing power, has been going down steadily. Nearly, believe it or not, 10% per year since like the 1980s or something. Now, obviously, that takes into consideration, that's compounding. That's a compounded decline. So that is to say 10% of 100. The next year, that's 10% of 100. Even though the last year was higher, you're starting with a new 100%. So hopefully that makes sense. So if you don't understand math, it doesn't make sense if I say it declines 10% each year without explaining that that's a compounded declination. So in 10 years you'd be at zero if I didn't explain that part. But in reality, it goes down 10% and slowly slows down, and in reality, it would never get to zero, ever. It'd go to infinity before it gets to zero. Anyways, so guys, understand that the reason why this is, in part, is because of socialism. We have had to make it so the US dollar has less value. So the US has had to start making up random campaigns to fight world hunger, fight terrorism in the Middle East, has to pay gargantuous amounts to basically police the whole world, and we have to pay insane amounts to literally pay money directly to foreign powers that are sometimes led by dictators. This has happened throughout the years. We will send foreign aid to countries like during the Soviet Union. The United States actually paid enormous amounts of wheat to the Soviet Union to keep their people alive because they couldn't keep their people alive. So we had to keep them alive. And of course, the U.S. taxpayers paid for the wheat. That's money. That's just one example. We've also been doing this for just dozens of countries in Africa, several countries in Latin America, so that means South America and Central America. And a lot of these loans, we don't actually expect to be paid back the loans, and we don't actually want to be paid back the principal. What we want is for them to only continue paying the interest on these loans forever. And when they default on even the interest, that's when the people at the IMF and the Federal Reserve get together and they talk to some people from the Council on Foreign Relations. And behind the scenes, they say, okay, we're going to rewrite these loans for you guys. Don't worry, don't panic. You're not going to really default on us. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically rewrite the loans so that they basically start now, again, all over. And we'll reduce the interest payments, and we will also forgive part of the sum. But for the most part, the loan is exactly the same, and we just reduce the amount of interest. And we'll even pay that country a large sum, and usually hundreds of millions, if not billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars to basically tell them, if the politicians there, if you need to scrape off a little bit to support yourselves, that's fine. Go ahead and scrape off a little bit of money to, feel rich and powerful and stay in control of your country. But for the most part, that money is actually just to pay ourselves back. The money we give them is just to tell these people, take off 10% to make yourselves happy, stay in power, but the other 90%, pay us the interest on the loans that we gave you, that we don't want you to actually pay off. We just want you to continue paying interest on those loans. Anyways, this has a compounding effect on the U.S. taxpayer. It means there's a hidden tax called inflation, and the inflation is created by the Federal Reserve creating basically money out of nowhere to pay other countries. And so it used to be 2%. It's larger than 2%. I don't know if there's any real figures on the actual inflation anymore. I think it's much closer to 4% now. I've read some figures that it's closer to 4% a year. So the Federal Reserve's printing so much money to pay other governments that we're actually devaluing all of the U.S. currency by 4% each year to pay other governments to police the world. It's not worth it. In closing, I just want to say the quality of life in the United States has been steadily declining. The quality of life did not necessarily decline for quite some time, and that's because in the beginning all the change was that Americans continued to work harder, take less vacations, and eventually the women had to step in, and now all women have to work too. So now that we've gotten to the point where men and women are working hard, taking less vacations in almost every country on the planet, literally, look at these figures, look at all of Europe, all of Latin America, all of Asia. Actually, I have to go back. Asia is about on par with the U.S. And that might be because the globalists have some plans for them as well. But anyways, by and large, life doesn't have to be this hard, guys. It really doesn't. And if you stopped trying to be a world government, the U.S. government, the U.S. taxpayer, if we weren't paying the whole world in one way or another, either paying for their national protection or paying them directly in loans to stay afloat and support their own people, even though their government is corrupt or something, then things would be a lot better in the U.S. You can trust me on that. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys, and catch me in the next one. Sorry this one ran a little long. Hopefully the next one will be 10 minutes.